It was a chilly afternoon in a small American town where time seemed to move slower, and the hum of old engines echoed down quiet streets. Inside a retro-style diner, the smell of coffee, bacon, and grease filled the air as the jukebox hummed softly in the background. The turquoise walls gleamed under the soft sunlight streaming through the windows, casting a nostalgic glow over red and teal booths. People chatted lazily, clinking cups and plates, until a moment arrived that would stop every sound, every whisper, and turn that ordinary day into something unforgettable. A middle-aged biker named Reed Dawson, known in his circle as Red Dog, sat in his usual corner booth. He was a man who looked like life had carved him from stone, tattoos running down his arms, a gold cross resting over his chest, his denim vest worn and frayed with time. His hands were calloused, the kind that had gripped motorcycle handles more often than handshakes. To most people, he looked intimidating, a man who'd lived rough, probably broken a few rules, maybe even a few hearts. Yet behind his hard eyes was something deeper, something tired. He stirred his coffee absently, staring out the window, unaware that fate was about to sit down at his table in a form he least expected. If you believe that kindness can still exist in unexpected places, if you believe second chances can come from the most unlikely people, then pause this video for a second, like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support keeps these stories of real humanity alive. That's when she walked in, or rather, stumbled in. A thin woman, maybe in her late 20s, wearing an old gray sweater that hung loose over her frail body. Her jeans were torn, her shoes mismatched. In her arms, she held a little girl, no older than 3. The child's hair was tangled, her cheeks pale from the cold. The mother's eyes scanned the diner quickly, not for a seat, not for a menu, but for something else, for a sign of mercy. The waitress behind the counter gave her a cautious glance but didn't move. Customers turned their heads briefly before going back to their meals. Only Reed noticed how tightly the woman held her daughter, whispering softly to keep her calm. She walked slowly toward his table, every step weighed down by fear and hesitation. Then, instead of sitting, she lowered herself to her knees beside the table, a gesture that caught the attention of everyone nearby. Her voice trembled as she looked at the plate in front of him. The biker had barely touched his fries and steak, and steam still rose from his coffee cup. Her lips parted slightly, her hand trembling as she pointed toward the food. "Can I take the leftovers, for my daughter?" she whispered. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The chatter stopped. Even the jukebox's hum felt distant. Reed stared at her, speechless. The child in her lap pressed her face against her mother's chest, clutching the thin fabric of her sweater. The woman's eyes were red, not just from hunger, but from the humiliation of asking. Reed looked down at his plate, then back at her. He could feel something shifting inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, guilt, compassion, maybe both. Reed had been many things in life, a fighter, a wanderer, a man running from mistakes that had once defined him. But at that moment, seeing that woman kneeling on the diner floor, he was reminded of something he'd tried to bury, his own past. Years ago, he'd lost a family. A wife who couldn't take the chaos anymore. A little daughter he hadn't seen since she was 5. He didn't even know where they were now. Every night, when the engines went quiet, he'd see that little face in his mind, wondering if she ever missed him. And now, here was this woman, asking for food not for herself, but for a child, the same way his little girl might have needed help once, and he hadn't been there. Without a word, Reed stood up. The woman's eyes widened, thinking she had angered him. Instead, he pushed his plate gently toward her and walked over to the counter. Everyone's gaze followed him as he spoke quietly to the cook, who nodded. Moments later, Reed returned, carrying 2 takeout boxes filled with warm food and a bottle of milk. He knelt down beside the woman, lowering himself to her level, a rough, tattooed biker on his knees in a diner floor, face to face with a mother and child. "This isn't leftovers," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "This is fresh. And there's more for tomorrow." He placed the boxes in her hands, then reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small folded bill, enough for a week's worth of meals. The woman's lips quivered. She looked down at the food, then up at him, tears spilling over her cheeks. Why would you help me?" she whispered. Reed looked at the child nestled against her chest and said quietly, "Because once, I couldn't help mine." For a long moment, there was silence. The entire diner watched as the woman clutched the food and money against her chest, whispering thank yous that trembled with gratitude. The other bikers, sitting a few booths away, turned their eyes down, some swallowing hard, some pretending not to wipe their faces. Even the waitress, who had stayed still before, now came over and offered a warm cup of cocoa to the little girl. Reed sat back down slowly, his heart heavy yet lighter than it had been in years. He watched the woman leave, her daughter in her arms, her eyes brighter than when she entered. The sound of the diner returned, faint murmurs, clinking dishes, but something had changed. Kindness had filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. He looked out the window again, the reflection of the departing mother faint against the glass. For the first time in a long time, Reed smiled, not the tough biker smirk people were used to, but a quiet, genuine smile of a man who had just found a piece of himself again. That night, as he rode his motorcycle home under the fading light, Reed felt something warm in his chest. Maybe it was hope. Maybe forgiveness. The wind whipped past him, carrying away the years of regret he'd worn like armor. Somewhere out there, he hoped his daughter was safe, maybe even being cared for by someone kind, someone who believed that a single act of compassion could change everything. And that's exactly what happened in that diner. A woman who had nothing gave everyone a reminder of humanity. And a man who thought he had nothing left to give rediscovered the part of his soul he thought was gone. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, because sometimes, all it takes is one act of compassion to change a life forever. Before we end, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in that biker's place? Comment below, your words might just inspire someone watching right now. As the neon lights flickered outside the diner that evening, no one who had been there forgot what they'd witnessed, a single question, a single plate of food, and a silence that spoke louder than any words ever could.